I have an example of a friend who started doing one-arm chin-up training. He basically got the one-arm chin-up and then he got into weighted calisthenics. He weighs 80 kg and he pulled 80-something% of his weight. And I asked him if he's able to do one-arm pull-up or chin-up, and he said no. Would you now say training for the weighted pull-up destroyed his one-arm chin-up? You could say that.
I remember when I got my first chin-up. It was late 2012 physical education class in the middle school. We usually played soccer or basketball outside, but since it was raining that day, our class was directed to the small gymnastics room upstairs. When I heard about the upcoming chin-up test, I got really nervous. Deep inside I had a hope that last couple of months of dumbbell training in the living room will pay off, but the thoughts about my past with pull-ups and all the failed attempts in the primary school were pretty overwhelming. This is when I heard the teacher saying my name.
Come on, Eric! It's your turn!
I took a deep breath and grabbed the bar as hard as I could. I did 5 reps. What you're about to witness now is the beginning of my calisthenics journey. Very inspired and proud of his achievement, Eric came home to open his computer and to quickly realize how weak he actually was. The one-arm pull-up is one of those moves that seems impossible at first. But despite its popularity and the label of ultimate feat of relative strength, lots of things about it remain unclear. It's been almost 9 years since the story you've just watched, and my respect towards OEP haven't got any smaller. However, over this time I developed a burning desire to uncover the truth behind this skill. The inconsistency I observed within technique, rate of progression and methods being used by individuals inspired me to finally take a closer look at it. I spent last couple of months studying and investigating different aspects of the one-arm pull-up. I've been reading, testing things out and having conversations with experienced coaches and athletes. I collected my ideas and created this video for anyone who used to work, currently works or plan to chase one-arm pull-up in the future. This video is not a tutorial. I will not give you the ready program for getting this skill or tell you how much time it's gonna take. However, what I will do is try to find out the answer to one borrowing question. Why does one-arm pull-up come so hard to some people, while much easier to the others?
So from a gymnastics standpoint, the one-arm pull-up or chin-up was never in the code of points, nor was it trained in any way serious, simply because gymnastics, it's not really a sport that involves many unilateral movements.
When we talk about pull-ups or chin-ups, we encounter a certain problem. You see, the situation here is a bit different than in case of commonly known bodyweight skills like front lever or iron cross. These movements have their direct origins and clear, straightforward standards. In opposed to that, one-arm pull-up is technically just a very difficult variation of classic exercise. And when I say classic, I don't exaggerate. Some exercises similar to pull-ups were mentioned in the ancient book De Sanitare Tuenda, also known as Galen's Hygiene. The work of famous Greek physician is probably one of the first well-documented mentions of the ancient exercises. And while the later history of two-arms pull-up is very long and intricate, it's fair to say that it got popularized in the 19th century along with the origination of physical culture. Then it got really pushed in mid-19s along with bodybuilding and fitness magazines. But it's quite obvious that the label and context around this movement was changing based on the time and environment. And so now when we look at the one-arm pull-up, it has never been included to gymnastics code of points, nor classified as a skill on any apparatus. Gymnastics has never really supported unilateral strength movements, and because of low specificity and high stress that one-arm pull-up brings, it does not find a big usage in competitive endeavor, as my friends Davide and Nave confirmed. Now, this doesn't mean the world was not aware of the possibility of pulling up on one arm. For example, in the book Big Arms written by Bob Hoffman in 1967, we can see the photo of Paul Holloway performing one-arm chin-up on one finger. More than that, there is an actual method of progression being described as well. But the point relevant to further discussion stays the same. There is lack of standards and lack of rules that hold one-arm pull-up together. Before calisthenics became kind of a separate discipline, the group of athletes already somewhat interested in this movement were climbers. This is, for example, a thread I found from 2003 on the UK Climbing Forum. You can find a discussion between users on the utility, difficulty and ways to train for the one-arm pull-up. This conversation had place almost 20 years ago, but when you dig down a bit more and look up the most impressive feats related to OAC, you can realize many of them were in fact done by climbing specialists, who very often integrated grip and finger strength component to the skill itself. What you just see is the clip of Zev Zaccavelli from 2006 that is the oldest YouTube video I found of someone performing the proper one-arm pull-up. Over the years, the skill got popularized as one of the bodyweight training fits. We cannot underestimate the contribution of street workout videos and books like Building the Gymnastics Bodies by Christopher Summer, Overcoming Gravity by Stephen Lowe, or at the time very popular Convict Conditioning by Paul Wade, whose existence has not got verified up till this day. Nowadays, one-arm pull-up is a commonly seen element in calisthenics performance that is being put on many people's training goals list. There are many versions, established methods of learning it, exercises and theories regarding the skill. In spite of it, up to this day there is still no consensus regarding what is the best way to train for it.
When it comes to vertical pulling movements in calisthenics, which are mostly pull-ups or chin-ups, a lot of people tend to think these are completely different exercises and movements. In fact, those exercises are pretty similar.
You probably noticed that so far I've been using two terms interchangeably, one-arm pull-up and one-arm chin-up. Well, just through very basic observation of athletes performing this move, we can realize that not all one-arm pull-ups are the same. In fact, there is so much more to it than simply grip. But before we can dive in and explore these differences, we need to deeply understand the bilateral version of this exercise and how basic pull-up forms differ from each other. The pull-up is a classic example of vertical pulling motion. We are using mainly our shoulder extensors, adductors and forearm flexors in order to produce force which vector is axial, meaning about parallel to the spine. That's in opposed to horizontal pulling variations where the vector is antero-posterior, meaning perpendicular in relation to the spine. The official guidelines for range of motion set by International Streetlifting Federation state that any kind of accepted pull-up starts with completely extended forearms and finishes when the bottom of chin crosses the bar vertically and horizontally. If we look at the external moment arms in pull-up movement, technically the biggest loading on the shoulder should come somewhere in the middle range of motion, when the shoulder is in the farthest horizontal distance from the bar. While this is an important observation, obviously it does not imply exercise has to be the hardest in these exact angles. One of the references here would be the theoretical strength curves calculated by Stanley Plagenhoff, according to which the shoulder extension and forearm flexion start losing strength along with range of motion reaching certain threshold. When we combine all the factors together, like the internal moment arms and length to tension relationship, we can estimate the actual torque that different muscles can produce in given positions. And for most people, pull-ups will usually have a descending tension curve. In simple words, it gets harder along with range of motion. Now, based on grip width of the pull-up, our humeral bone may be moving in different planes. There are three main planes we are talking about in anatomy. the sagittal, frontal and transverse plane. As we increase the width of our grip, we move more and more from sagittal to frontal, and by the same token increase the contribution of shoulder adduction. Apart from the width, what differs pull-ups from each other is the rotation of the forearm, which may be either fixed in different positions, like pronated, supinated, neutral, or able to move freely. There are obviously some other things that we can manipulate with during pull-ups, like scapula, pelvis and spine position. But today we will not be focusing on them. Our main goal is uncovering the differences between grips and then apply them to the one-arm pull-up. So we know the simple anatomy and mechanics of the pull-up. We know there are certain differences between them, but the question comes, how do those differences manifest in practice? There were a couple of studies done comparing different grips in terms of muscle excitation. In the study from 2010, the researchers were trying to find out the differences between pronated pull-up, supinated chin-up and so-called perfect pull-up with twisting handles, which is essentially the same as pull-ups done on gymnastics rings. After analyzing 25 participants' results, they found out that out of 7 examined muscles, the pectoralis major and biceps brachii had significantly higher myoelectric activity during the supinated chin-up than during pronated pull-up. On the other hand, the pull-up had a greater activation of lower trapezius than chin-up. A similar study was conducted in 2016. This time 4 different grips were tested on 19 participants. The wide grip pronated pull-up, neutral and supinated shoulder width grips, as well as the rope grip. The only significant difference reported was the higher activity of middle traps in pronated pull-ups when comparing with neutral grip. Finally, the study from 2017 compared classic pull-up, suspended grip pull-up and towel pull-up. Based on 15 participants, it reported one significant difference, which was again higher middle trapezius excitation in pull-up, this time comparing with towel pull-ups. While I could not find much more solid data on pull-ups, there were many other EMG studies done over the years regarding lat pull-down exercise. Some of them show slight variations between muscles, others say there is no significant difference. To avoid confusion, I want to say that while these studies can certainly be useful, the high myoelectric activity doesn't automatically imply muscle is being more mechanically loaded, nor that certain variation will always lead to better muscle growth because of it. Instead of expanding on this very complex topic while not feeling competent to do it, I'm gonna direct you to one of the best articles I found on the subject. If you want to get deep in the topic of targeting specific back areas through varying grips and positions, I recommend you to check out the following Instagram accounts. And if you're so generous, you can actually follow my account as well. I post random Instagram story every single month or two, so make sure not to miss out on the content. So coming back, yes, there are quite many limitations that have to be taken into account with mentioned studies. However, I think we can comfortably take away one thing from them. The differences between grips are probably much more nuanced than we initially thought. And the only question that comes to my mind is why chin-ups are usually so much easier than pull-ups. Now, the most popular answer to this question is because chin-ups use more of the biceps. And while this is not a false statement, it is not the only thing that makes chin-ups and pull-ups different. First, let's see what studies say about differences between forearm orientations. First of all, along with forearm extension, the maximal angle of supination decreases and pronation increases, while along with flexion, exactly opposite situation occurs. This is one of the main reasons why chin-ups feel quite uncomfortable at the bottom and force a lot of external rotation in the shoulder, which demands a significant stretch in lats, bicep and other internal rotators taking part in the movement, while on the other hand, chin-ups tend to have a greater range of motion at the top than pull-ups. The supinated grip engages our bicep more and makes flexion stronger than pronated grip, which tends to engage more of the brachioradialis. A quick fun fact is that while supinated curl is stronger than pronated, one study suggests we actually have more strength with neutral orientation of the forearm. First, let's look at the pull-up and chin-up from the back. There is one significant difference here that has a lot to do with the grip. The chin-up position is more stable, and you don't have to work as hard to keep elbows from flaring out. I suspect it's mainly due to the larger range of motion in adduction than abduction of our wrists, especially given that according to some research, the ranges seem to be lower in supination than pronation. Now let's take a look at these two recordings taken from the side. In both cases, the only difference here is the rotation of forearms, and grip is shoulder width. When it comes to chin-ups, thanks to the stronger forearm position as well as range of motion of supination, your shoulder stays much closer to the bar. And I have to say I could exaggerate the motion here to illustrate the point. But in about the middle range where the external moment arm is the biggest, your forearms do a slight movement forward and take some pressure off the shoulder extensors. In pull-ups this doesn't occur in such a degree and you end up being farther from the bar. When you try to force it, you will see how disadvantageous is this motion. At the very top of chin-up, forearms lean slightly back and you end up in a pretty comfortable position. On the other hand, the flexion range of pronated grip doesn't let you go as far, and therefore you stay leaned back and finish the movement shortly. If you however force it and try to get chin fully over the bar, then your forearms go even more back and start putting more pressure on the elbow extensors. Obviously, this is why pull-ups are mostly done with wider grip, which involves more shoulder adduction and recruits a bit different muscle fibers. But it's fair to state that apart from muscle activation differences, the forearm supination causes the chin-up to be more biomechanically efficient movement pattern than pull-up, especially when it comes to the top range of motion. You can come to the same conclusion by analyzing not numerous studies on the topic. The real question that comes now is how we can use this knowledge for one-arm version.
But the one-arm chin-up on bar is very hard, and I would say I can easily do 3 or 4 reps on each arm on the rings, no problem. But 1 rep on the bar with one-arm chin-ups on the bar,
yeah, I don't like it. I like more the one-arm pull-ups on bar or the one-arm chin-ups on rings.
By watching any calisthenics content related to one-arm pull-up, it gets obvious that there are differences between performed reps. Just like with normal pull-ups, the one-arm version comes with different kinds and different athletes prefer one type over the other. But what exactly are those types? Just like we established in the two arms version, the one-arm pull-up has some form requirements that must be met. The major two of them are certainly the range of motion and lack of momentum generated by legs to complete the rep. Obviously, these are just some arbitrary standards that most people in the community would accept, and as you're gonna realize soon, they have their own set of problems. I came up with the idea of creating some sort of chart that would gather different mostly seen and performed version of this skill. Something similar to the handstand press chart I created in the past. There are 3 main criteria I took into consideration. First of all, the type of grip being used. Secondly, if and how that grip changes over the course of rep. And finally, the apparatus that is being used. Based on these 3 aspects, I differentiated 5 one-arm pull-up types. I decided to reach out to Mario. He used to run a smaller YouTube channel called Calisthenics Smart Training. For me, he has always been one of the guys I've been watching and admiring since my old days in calisthenics, especially for his one-arm pull-up and chin-up abilities. Surprisingly, he received the message and shared with me some of his really interesting thoughts on the differences between one-arm pull-ups. On top of it, he provided me with the recordings of separate forms done in a very clean manner. The first very popular one-arm pull-up type is the bar pronated version. This movement can be often seen amongst calisthenics and street workout competitors during their performance. Their frequent appearance makes total sense, since the movement is very accessible. What I mean is, it's easy to integrate smoothly as a part of some kind of bar routine, and the movement itself is often faster, therefore usually better from the standpoint of spectacularity. The second, also very popular version is the one-arm twisting pull-up/chin-up done on gymnastics ring. This one seems to be very popular in the non-competitive calisthenics. What I mean is that it's widely considered to be not only pulling strength feat, but also great exercise that can be scaled down and used for strength and physique development. The unfixed nature of rings makes it friendly for people with certain flexibility limitations and creates a lot of freedom when it comes to pulling mechanics by letting the body find most efficient paths and positions. The third variation is basically the one that imitates the ring variation. I called it the twisting bar OAP/OAC. Just like the ring, this skill utilizes the fact that bottom position is easier to tackle with pronated grip, while the top part with supinated or neutral grip, exactly like we discussed in the previous part about bilateral pull-up. The only difference that could make this variation potentially harder is the additional coordination required for the twisting mechanism that can be a separate pattern to learn. The fourth one is rarely seen supinated one-arm chin-up on the bar. This skill is a real deal, and it shows how different one-arm pull-up can be from the bilateral version. In the classic chin-up, your hands are both fixed on the bar, and both shoulders and forearms are forced to go into more externally rotated position. These forces counteract each other and create a very stable environment for the pull. The more stability equals bigger strength potential for the muscles. Now, when you take one hand away, your body will naturally rotate internally. In the bar one-arm chin-up, you have to work against this rotation and initiate the pull from a very difficult and unstable position, then maintain it through the whole range of motion. The last one in my classification is the neutral grip one-arm pull-up. Initially, I did not want to include it into the chart because I honestly don't have anything special to say about it. But I figured out it doesn't fit any of the already mentioned variations and is still somewhat often performed.
So yes, to achieve the biomechanical advantage, it's definitely recommended to keep the elbow of the pulling arm as close to your body as possible.
The part you see right now includes some clips of mine from a couple of years ago in calisthenics. The pulling skills were always something I didn't excel at and felt like I had to put twice as much work in order to get somewhere. And that despite very diligent programming and what I would consider high prioritization of my training, at least at the time. Now, the reps you can see on recordings are by no means good or even decent form. Many of them are in fact just failed attempts or some random test I threw from time to time. But what makes it interesting is that while I can comfortably say at one point I almost had proper one-arm pull-up, I have never got so close to the ring or supinated bar version. Now, what makes it even more interesting is the fact I never actually trained specifically for pronated one-arm pull-up, and apart from sporadical attempts, the only work I have been putting was directed to the one-arm chin-up on the rings or weighted chin-ups. Isn't it strange that technically one of the harder grips is the one that allowed me to reach the biggest range of motion? Or maybe there is something we just cannot see. Now, this is exactly what I meant talking about the arbitrary standards. As people who really admire calisthenic skills, we rarely look objectively at what we see. The quite significant details are in front of our eyes, but instead we focus on the big picture. And while at this point most of us immediately spot slightly bent arms in the planche or front lever, I don't think it's popular to spot a significant difference in range of motion between these two forms of one-arm pull-up. The widely accepted standard for pronated OAP is reaching the bar with the chin or touching the bar with the other shoulder. It is often overlooked that you can achieve both of them with just beyond 90-degree extension in the shoulder and flexion in elbow, which is what you would consider half range of motion in case of, for example, rings one-arm chin-up. Now, in the ring version, most would say the standard is getting to full elbow flexion and extending the shoulder to the point of touching the belly, till you reach below clavicle with ring. This is a really important observation, as these two forms derive from different types of thinking. When we think about reaching the bar, it is external requirement that can be achieved in many different ways. However, when we think about achieving, for example, a maximal flexion in the elbow, we talk about the internal requirement. That will mean more or less the same for every individual. And obviously it will still differ based on people's anatomy, like the humeral bone length. But I hope you get the point. Hypothetically, if there was a person with a very short forearm, he would be naturally predisposed to one-arm pull-up, but only if we are talking about the external requirement of reaching the bar. If the requirement was X amount of flexion in elbow or extension in shoulder, he would still have to perform a full range of motion rep, just like any other individual. On the other side, hypothetically long forearm of the same person would make it impossible to reach external standard, but the internal requirement could still be met. And so neither of the mentioned ways of thinking is better or worse. I just want to illustrate that there is a clear difference. When talking about differences, there are many other caveats we can talk about. For example, if you look closely at most pronated one-arm pull-ups, you will see a noticeable internal twist at the top that changes the potentially hardest part of pronated pull-up to essentially neutral grip. Now, the most important thing for me is that you understand I'm not implying people whose recordings you see performed a cheated rep. First of all, they are great athletes, and if they wanted to, they could most likely do any variation. Secondly, the standards have their place for a reason and should not be considered cheating. As we already established, the forearm pronation is being limited along with increasing flexion of elbow. While it doesn't matter in wide grip pull-ups, the recordings certainly expose the difficulties with closer or shoulder width grip, which is very similar to the one in OAP. This is why pronated one-arm pull-up without any body twist is something extremely difficult and rare to see. So what is the point of all of that, you may ask? What I really try to get across here is that the devil lies in the details. Since one-arm pull-up is the movement without any strict definition, rules or standards, we have to create our own basic system of evaluation. This way the sentence "I can do one-arm pull-up" or chin-up can actually tell us something instead of just providing random range of similar but different skills. One-arm pull-up does not equal one-arm pull-up. When evaluating the rep, always look at little things, like if the body is rotating or exact ranges of motion in the elbow and shoulder joints. It's not about calling out cheated reps, since unless you have a strict set of rules, you can't even say what is and what is not cheating. It's more about being aware of differences, and I really do believe that not overlooking them and paying attention to the details will make calisthenics better.
So for me, I think that obviously if you train specifically towards the one-arm chin-up, you are going to learn it more quickly. But I think that it's definitely possible to achieve the one-arm chin-up without ever doing that much specific training for it. As long as you are fairly light, lean, and have years and years of high-quality chin-up, pull-up, and rope climbing training under your belt already.
There is one biggest theme rolling in any sort of discussion related to one-arm pull-up. This theme is the constant confusion and very different anecdotal evidence regarding the transfer of weighted pull-ups to the one-arm version. It gets to the point where some individuals promote achieving one-arm pull-up only by increasing relative basic strength in weighted pull-ups, while others separate these movements completely and treat OAP as a skill that must be developed with direct work and is not associated with weighted pulls in any way. As always, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but it's very hard to actually assess where. In the book The Super Athletes from 1973, which is the collection of strength feats performed by humans, the author David Willoughby writes the following sentence: "To chin once with one arm is equivalent to chinning once with both arms, while carrying extra weight equal to 2/3 of the performance's own body weight." By the same token, the author implies that weighted pull-up with 66% body weight is enough for the one-arm pull-up, meaning the athlete weighing 80 kilos pulling up 53 kilos can probably pull up on one arm as well. I was trying to look at some real-world examples to search for any existing common trends. The direct experiments of this type are most reliable if the grip and range of motion of both attempts are similar. On top of it, in a perfect world, the person is just barely able to perform one-arm pull-up with both arms. This way we know the strength is not left in the tank. Fortunately, I found a video of my friend Artem from the calisthenics school, who amongst many other people has also contributed to the video you're watching. So shout out to you, Artem. Now, in the experiment he performed the attempt of pronated one-arm pull-up and then afterwards a quick build-up to the 1 rep max of weighted pronated pull-up. In the test, Artem was able to pull on right arm but not fully on left arm. Afterwards, he tested his max weighted pull-up, which resulted in 78% of his body weight. I wanted to find a similar case, this time with one-arm chin-up, which, as we already mentioned, is more consistent and easier variation to standardize. Unfortunately, I could not find any similar test. However, then I reminded myself of one thing. It's been a couple of years since I was binge watching Tyson and Lachlan in their first bodyweight workout series. If you have never been aware of it, then I highly recommend you to watch every single episode of this, in my eyes, the most enjoyable series of calisthenics related videos.
It's time to pull.
One of the goals of Lachlan in the first series was achieving the one-arm chin-up. The version he was finally performing on testing day was actually the twisting OAC on the bar. I like this example because it was very clear the one-arm chin had been max level of performance at the time of testing. On day 7 he performed 2.5 reps of the chin-ups with 50 kilos. Now, the chin-ups were not loaded fully through the whole range of motion, but he performed the reps at the end of the session in an already fatigued state. So let's call it 50 kilos for 2. On the video from day 18, Lachlan mentioned that his average weight at the time of series was 76.5 kilos.
I'm going to weigh myself now. I'm interested to see if I weigh 76.5 or more, which is what I was weighing before I got sick.
We have to take into account that later on he got sick after trying Cali Muscle pre-workout formula and had to rebuild his weight. But let's just round it to 76 kilos. Now, I won't be trying Cali Muscle pre-workout formula, but I did use 1 rep max formulas to finish the calculations. And on average they show that the overall weight of 126 kilos lifted for 2 is equivalent to about 131 kilos, which means 56 kilos added to the chin-up. After my calculations, I reached out to Lachlan himself and asked if he had any additional information. According to what he said, we were pretty close with our assumptions, and even though he does not have a clear attempt recorded on the day of testing, the data gathered along the series kind of aligned with what he said. Since there is no definite number and strength of Lachlan most likely went up since day 7, I would assume he could pull anywhere from 75 up to 80% of his body weight on the day of testing, with couple % of error margin. Based on these two examples, we could conclude that something from 75 to 80% of body weight lifted in chin-up or pull-up would be a sensible number to consider being equivalent to one-arm version. But there are significant problems with this argument. These are only 2 pieces of data, with one of them being predicted and roughly estimated. 2 pieces of data in the ocean of anecdotes and opinions varying anywhere from 60 up to 110%. In order to get some more realistic view on this matter, we would have to gather some bigger group of people on different levels, with different training experience and features like height or body weight. This way we could take these metrics into account and potentially come up with some general conclusions.
If you want to get the one-arm pull-up, either everything matters or nothing matters at all. I saw my friend achieve his first one-arm pull-up just by doing lots of bodyweight pull-ups. He was like 60 kg, no legs and low body fat. That's why there's a lot of different opinions and methods in regards to the one-arm pull-up.
One day I was casually doing my laundry when I suddenly got an idea. I'm gonna create a survey. I immediately got in front of the desk and started contemplating about all the possible options. Gathering data from a larger group of people to make certain predictions can be really useful, but it's also a complicated process. There are many caveats that need to be addressed and handled, many important aspects that are present in every single stage of this kind of project. But at this point, along with all the other stuff, I really didn't feel like I could handle it all and execute properly. Well, at least only by myself. The night after coming up with the idea, I reached out to my friend and longtime client who was interested in taking some data analysis project. It's worth to mention he was also the one helping me with modifying the last front lever survey. Because he asked me not to reveal his real name, for the sake of the video I will refer to him as Jake. Along with him we discussed the idea for making one-arm pull-up survey and prepared a set of questions that could be a gate for collecting interesting data. The only problem was that since Jake currently lives in Korea, there were often some issues with timing of our conversations.
The main limitation of the previous front lever weighted pull-up survey is lack of data validation. Data validation means just basically checking if the data inputted by the survey participants are correct, like corrected format.
After hearing out the main issues with my previous survey, we started talking about the ways to make the current one better and more reliable from the start.
Good to, specifically put in a question that says, I've done a lot of bouldering, or I've done a lot of swimming, because, you keep, seeing that in all your interviews with people.
Our main goal with the project was getting the idea of how correlated weighted pull-ups and chin-ups are with one-arm versions based on a larger group of people. Some other goals I had in mind was seeing how some anthropometric features affect the one-arm pull-up, as well as what are anecdotally best methods to learn this skill. We decided to split the survey into 3 separate sections. First one of them supposed to distinct imperial and metric measurement systems. After choosing one of the options, the participant would get directed to either second or third section, which were essentially same sets of questions split in parts. The first part meant to gather basic measurements like height and weight, as well as the length of the upper arm. After gathering measurements, the next part meant to identify the relative pulling strength of an athlete in the context of weighted pull-up. We needed to distinguish whether someone refers to supinated or pronated version, and so the first question referred to that. The second one asked for any weighted pull-up set that was taken to max reps. In the further stage, along with Jake, we used the Epley formula, which is the simple equation made to predict 1 rep max based on the sets with more than 1 rep. Undoubtedly, the formula is not perfect and has its limitations, but so does the whole project. We try to be as accurate as possible while knowing there are things we can't do in online survey. The next question referred to pull-up endurance and was an effective sanity check for the previous question. For example, if someone provided 100% bodyweight pull-up as 1 rep max but is able to do only 5 pull-ups, we can comfortably assume he made a mistake or bad assumption. But unfortunately we could only use it in the obvious cases like the one mentioned, because we understand the endurance is an independent trainable feature. After assessing weighted pull-up strength, it was time to look at the one-arm pull-up ability. Here the situation was more complicated and nuanced. We decided to split OAP to the pronated and supinated version, to which we also included Ring's one-arm chin-up. We established 7 progressive levels, which included slow eccentrics, bad form and partial reps. We also gave participants the ability to provide other description of their level, which as we later on realized was very useful to create another category of multiple reps of one-arm pull-ups. The next question collected information regarding specific training time for one-arm pull-up. In the last question of the survey, we asked what in participants' eye was the most helpful OAP training tool they have used. We gave multiple classic and popular choices, but of course added the ability to put other answers as well. There was also a bonus part included in the survey. Along with Gornation, we decided to make a little giveaway contest. If you have participated, more about that at the end of the video. Needless to say, the set of questions was officially finished. It was time to promote the survey. The next day I created a list of all places through which I could potentially push the survey to the public. Given that in the recent one I managed to gather over 300 people, this time I decided to raise the bar. And so along with Jake we established the goal of 1000 answers. I started with making the community post on YouTube. Then I put the survey link to my bio and created IG post inviting people to take part and share the questionnaire. But I did not expect the Instagram and YouTube to bring even half the answers. My biggest hope was sharing the survey to the most popular online bodyweight community, Reddit Bodyweight Fitness, which was the key to success of Front Lever survey promotion. Just as I did last time, I created the post, put the link, explained my intentions and waited for the users to pump it up more. This is when the situation got a bit tricky. The next morning I woke up and before heading off to the classes decided to check out how the thread was performing. When I opened up the page and clicked on the post, I saw this. Alright, it was not as dramatic, but the fact that my post was apparently deleted from subreddit did not make the situation easier. Now, it's not that I am upset about it. I totally understand the post could be interpreted as a self-promotion or spamming with some random links, but the fact is it was an unexpected and quite unpleasant plot twist. After contacting Jake, we came up with the idea to share it on a climbing subreddit Climb Harder. As mentioned before, the movement we are talking about is very popular amongst these communities, so it was kind of my last resort on this platform. Now, this is the moment when I really want to say thank you. Because of the Reddit incident, I thought we wouldn't be able to reach the goal, but when I got back on Instagram the next day, I totally regained my hope. I am extremely grateful for every share and every completion of the survey. It was really cool to see people who I had been watching and looking up to years ago were now giving me their support.
Τέλος πάντων, η φόρμα για να τις συμπληρώσεις βρίσκεται στο link στο bio του Frank's Movement. Πατήστε εδώ και...
So to all of you and all non-creators who helped me out, big shout out to you. Because of so many people sharing the survey on their stories, within their communities and between themselves, we reached 1130 answers. It was time for the most important part, which was analyzing the data and driving conclusions. After sorting out the data and cleaning it out, we came up with some interesting results. First of all, let's look at the general distribution of people who took part in the survey based on different factors. Let's begin with anthropometrical data. The average participant of our survey was around 176 centimeters tall, weighing 71 kilos. The distribution of data was close to normal in both cases. What about upper arm length? Unfortunately, a very low percentage of people provided the answer. On top of it, long after the survey was done, I realized what I already explained in the paradox of ROM segment, meaning that dependent on the context, forearm length may play a role as well. So I admit it's my own fault, my own oversight. Something to include in the next potential studies or observations. Now, let's move on to the strength part. It looks like the vast majority of people prefer weighted pull-up over chin-up, since there were almost 4 times more of their reports. Unfortunately, this doesn't allow us to make any fair assumptions regarding grip distinction. The average 1 rep max expressed in bodyweight percentage turned out to be about 48%, which is definitely quite high, but at the same time expected for this sort of population. Not surprisingly, many people taking part in the survey were not able to do one-arm pull-up of any kind, but a lot of them could perform at least one slow eccentric. What's interesting is that most people capable of one-arm pull-up or chin-up could actually do both versions. And the groups of people only able to do one of the versions seem to be pretty evened out. This could imply that the grip doesn't play such a huge role. If someone is really strong, he will be able to do both versions. But there is still some level of specificity required for people who are just able to perform one of them. This is obviously just one of the interpretations. What is not surprising is a pretty huge drop from one to multiple one-arm pull-ups when it comes to the number of participants. For me, it shows how advanced exercise one-arm pull-up is and how many people treat it as a skill, that you learn one rep and kind of abandon the further pursuit. Now, looking at this table, you can see a somewhat downward trend in weight as one-arm pull-up ability increases. You can see even more significant trend looking at height and 1 rep max of participants. A very interesting part of this table lies here. It shows that an average person able to do one-arm pull-up is able to pull up with approximately 76.4% of body weight attached. For people able to do one-arm chin-up, 74.5%. It's really interesting how close this is to my assumptions based on Artem's and Lachlan's examples. Let's take a deeper dive into one-arm pull-up ability and 1 rep max as a percentage of body weight. Again, you can see that people that can do one-arm pull-up or chin-up are usually stronger in weighted pull-up. A different interpretation can be that people with stronger weighted pull-ups are also stronger in one-arm pull-ups. Finally, this is the graph showing what people filling up the survey reported as most helpful on their way to one-arm pull-up or chin-up. Not surprisingly, most people use one-arm eccentrics as well as weighted pull-ups. That's about it when it comes to the basic observation. Now let's look at what the analysis has shown to drive some more accurate conclusions. Along with Jake, we decided to do two types of models, the logistic and ordinal regression. Now, the difference between them is in classification of results. The logistic regression basically answers yes or no, meaning someone can either do one-arm pull-up or not. After sanity checking and removing all the people who didn't submit their 1 rep max numbers, we were left with 731 observations that were taken under consideration for our logistic regression. These are the results that we got. Along with generally accepted consensus, anything with p-value below 0.05 can be treated as statistically significant. What does classify in our case are height, weight, 1 rep max as body weight percentage, max numbers of pull-ups, as well as years of training. When it comes to training style, what seems to be significant are climbing, partial reps, as well as pulley-assisted training. However, since the data in case of training style is very anecdotal, I would not take it as seriously. What it simply shows is that people who use these methods have higher probability of being able to do one-arm pull-up. Now let's take a look at the ordinal regression. Instead of binary answers, this type of analysis gives us the range of abilities. The yes or no question was extended to 4 more detailed levels. 0, referring to people who either never tried or are not able to do even one eccentric. Beginner, meaning being able to do one slow eccentric. Intermediate, referring to multiple eccentrics or bad form reps. And advanced, meaning 1 or more one-arm pull-ups with any grip possible. Unlike the logistic regression, the summary did not show which values were significant or not. However, this model can show us with more nuance where the trainee is currently at in his one-arm pull-up journey. Along with Jake, we created the OAP ability probability calculator. You simply put your weight, height, and 1 rep max expressed as a percentage of your body weight. After that, the formula calculates and shows the probability in which category you currently are. If you don't know your 1 rep max in body weight percentage, we included the calculator in the second tab, which is done based on the Epley formula we used. Now, we are inviting you to play with calculator while keeping in mind that it's all just for the purpose of having fun. Don't take the results literally as a fact, rather as a suggestion. However, you can definitely share your results in the comments and tell us how accurate or inaccurate they are based on your example. I think it might be a good time for some final thoughts regarding the survey. The project we did is a correlational type of research. Even though certain metrics should correlate based on the analysis, there is always a possibility it's just a coincidence, or there is some other factor that influences the data. Because it was in the form of the online survey, both qualitative and quantitative data we collect is self-reported. While I have a total trust in the goodwill of people, the answers will never be as accurate as data measured in lab at one point of time. The sanity checks are valuable but far from perfect. Needless to say, the results of the survey can give us the overview and well-established base of expectations, for example for some different studies in the future, something I do already have in plans. It can also propose certain ideas for our training and give us the estimation of where we are in our journey. However, we should not take every single part of it as a fact, rather as the estimation or general direction. With that said, I officially state the project came to the end, but is still open for interpretation. Today I open up the survey again. You can find the link to it in the description and contribute to the collection of answers if you haven't yet. Along with that, you can find the original database excluding personal information of participants. The full report and interpretation guide made by Jake will also be in the description. I encourage you to drive your own conclusions or ideas and share them in the comments section.
One-arm chins and their progressions are great because they allow you to use accommodating resistance and they can allow you to exert higher max forces per arm than bilateral movements.
The survey provided us with a lot of interesting insights. In majority of cases, it confirmed what most of us have already expected. It appears that height and weight negatively correlate with one-arm pull-up. In one of the videos I mentioned that height and center of mass positioning should not technically correlate negatively with the vertical strength exercises like pull-ups. While this is true to some extent when looking externally at the center of mass positioning, we have to remember that it's still harder to have a good relative strength when being physically bigger. This can be observed very well in nature. While ants can lift couple of their body weights on their back, the elephant would never be able to carry another elephant, just like any bigger size animal. This is obviously a very extreme example, but the truth is that according to the square cube law, larger and heavier body means it's harder to acquire relative strength. And of course there are some potentially correlated leverages involved like length of arms that might not predispose higher people to pull-ups, just like they don't predispose them to, for example, bench pressing. When it comes to weighted pull-ups, the survey suggests they do correlate with one-arm pull-up, which is obviously unsurprising considering a big similarity in both patterns. But there is one thing I have been always wondering about. The survey suggested that on average, people able to pull up on one arm can pull around 75% of their body weight attached in a normal pull-up or chin-up. Even before getting this data, I was always wondering why numbers like 60, 70 or 80% are enough for acquiring this skill. It's really hard to assess how much of an actual weight we lift in each joint during a pull-up. That's because it's a compound movement with many variables. Because our forearms are not moving, we should technically not take them into consideration. If you want to test it, just put some ankle weights on your forearms and see if it's harder to pull up this way. It most likely isn't. But if we assume that we lift our full body weight when pulling up, and 75% body weight attached equals one-arm pull-up, this means each arm is lifting about 12.5% more weight during one-arm pull-up than during weighted two arms pull-up. Yet the difficulty of both movements seems to be pretty similar. The question is, why? I think we should start from a quite clear statement. One-arm pull-up is not a pull-up cut in half. Although the patterns are similar, the one-arm version has still much more specific skill component. So let's expand on this point a little bit. A large portion of what I want to show lies in the kinematic chains of these both movements. Now, I'm gonna use the terminology adopted from Tom Purvis materials. As you will see, it doesn't necessarily align with how most people see, name and teach these things, but I do believe they are a correct way of analyzing and describing the chains in our body. If we look at the classic 2 arms pull-up from the side, we can notice that there is one restraint point of attachment. This is where our fingers wrap around the bar. Somewhere in vertical line below this point there has to be center of mass of our body. If we are talking about this plane exclusively, the pull-up is so-called suspended open chain movement. In this type of scenario, the movement in any joint will passively influence the position of other joints. For example, moving legs to the L-sit position will cause your hips to go back. If you push them forward, you need to compensate by pulling away from the bar in the shoulder and elbow. This is a very similar situation to the one you see in the squat. The squat is also an open chain movement if we are talking about the sagittal plane, but this time it's supported and not suspended. This causes the pull-up to have a lot of freedom and many options of performing in this plane if our strength allows us to. Now, when we look at the pull-up from the back in the frontal plane, we can find sort of different things happening. Since there are 2 points of attachment, the kinematic chain is being closed. Now, because there are lots of joints here, it is still not constrained to the point we can predict all movements just by moving one of the joints. But this time the movements in all joints are actively connected. This type of linkage can by intention improve our force alignment in the previously mentioned sagittal plane. Also, it doesn't require much skill and practice to create max outcome, because your body is naturally good at creating it for you. So now let's analyze the 1 arm pull-up in the same way. As you see, this time there is no closed chain in any plane. No matter if we look from the side or from the back, there is only 1 point of attachment creating the axis. This means all previously mentioned principles stay the same, but there is less guidance in finding the efficient movement pattern. Now, in the context of finding most efficient positions, the 1 arm pull-up will still require much less skill practice than supported open chain motions, like for example handstand push-ups. But since there is so much freedom in all possible planes, it will most likely take some time for the body to learn. And of course, apart from it, there are other strategies it can learn using, like generating momentum with the movement of second arm, or using the rotation to decrease range of pulling motion. So maybe the missing piece of the puzzle is that your body just gets very efficient with finding the best path for completing 1 arm pull-up motion, and with all the compensatory mechanisms along with it. Another big factor we should consider is the strength imbalance between both sides. I think this is something everyone can relate to. Even doing basic exercises like bicep curls, we are not able to lift as much weight with one of the arms, despite putting identical workload to both of them. And if we look at some unrelated data, we can find that strength imbalances in healthy individuals are really common. They can get to 10, 15 and sometimes even 20% asymmetry. If this holds true to upper limbs, it can be a pretty huge difference in things like weighted chin-ups. What if 120 kilos you're pulling is in fact 65 kilos pulled with one arm and 55 kilos pulled with the second one? Or what if you could pull more with one of the arms, but the specific two arms form is holding you back? In this context, one arm pull-up could be justifiably easier than 100% bodyweight pull-up, but only on the stronger arm and not both of them. Despite all these factors, there is still one more thing that could explain the disproportion: the phenomenon known as bilateral deficit. Several studies have demonstrated a lower capacity to generate force in bilateral exercises than when compared to the sum of strength produced by each limb separately. The underlying mechanisms of the bilateral deficit are not fully clear. What we do know is that the phenomenon seems to apply to upper and lower limbs, and in the long term it appears to adapt and be influenced by training. The two-limb unilateral training increases the deficit, while the two-limb bilateral training seems to decrease its level. Now, putting that aside, in order to tell the phenomenon does exist in our example, it should be tested specifically in this way. Because there are no specific studies that would test bilateral deficit on pull-ups, I decided to do it on my own. Now, here I have to give a shout out to my friend Philip and his wife Martina from Mindful Mover. A while back I've been scrolling through Instagram and saw their story. They've been testing out maximal pull-up strength with both arms, as well as one arm using a crane scale. The test in their case showed a clear difference that supports bilateral deficit idea, but we have to remember that Philip is someone that mainly trains using one arm, and so his results could potentially be due to specificity of training. That's why I decided to add some modifications. I ordered 2 exactly same crane scales and rented the gym room for 2 hours. And on top of it, I recruited 2 additional participants to make the test more reliable. After entering the gym and setting up the equipment, we started the test. Each one of us performed 3 seconds maximal isometric pulls in 3 different parts of the exercises. After each attempt on one arm, we took 5 minutes of rest and then performed the contraction in the same angle, but this time with 2 arms simultaneously. We used our phones to record every single attempt. Then we took a look at the footage and wrote in the highest number crane scale has shown within 3 seconds of isometric. If the attempt was done on 2 arms, we were looking at each one of the arms independently. We were trying to be very strict regarding joint angles as well as the stability, while allowing the body to find the most comfortable rotation in each attempt. I think what makes it especially interesting is the fact that each one of us had different training histories. I myself used to train a lot of one-arm unilateral exercises in the past. The second person, who was my brother, has literally only trained with weighted bilateral chin-ups. My friend, on the other hand, had never specialized in the chin-up as an exercise and rather performed it sporadically as a part of the general training program. Let's look at the results of our experiment. And again, as always, we have to start with the limitations of it. First of all, the sample size is very low. Secondly, the isometrics take away other important technical aspects of the normal isotonic reps. Also, there is obviously acceleration involved, and if someone pulled faster, it could influence the results despite trying to be strict in execution. If I repeated the test, I would also consider using weight vest instead of bumper plates on the knees, because they could negatively influence the amount of force we can produce. So if you decide to do the test on your own, keep this point in mind. It was still very interesting test to do, and the results of it were even more interesting. When taking every angle and every participant into consideration, on average we were almost 21% stronger when pulling with one arm. It also aligned with the previously mentioned theory. The person mostly trained with unilateral exercises had the highest deficit of over 25.5%. The person only trained with bilateral pull-ups was slightly below, while the least trained individual had much lower deficit of over 14%. Now, some other intriguing data to share is the asymmetry between arms. When measuring through unilateral pulling, the stronger arm was on average 8.4% stronger. When measured through bilateral pulling, there was still asymmetry, but only 3.7%. This makes me think that a lot of bilateral deficit might be actually related to the technique blocking us from generating more strength with our stronger arm. To sum up the part about bilateral deficit, I'm gonna say this. Obviously, this little experiment is not enough to drive any brave conclusions, but theoretically, in the context of getting one-arm pull-up, the person with smaller bilateral deficit would need a larger number in weighted chin-up than someone with a bigger deficit. Let's say there is a guy weighing 80 kilos that has just achieved his one-arm pull-up. Now, let's play out 2 different scenarios. In one of them, the same guy has bilateral deficit of 10%. This means each one of his arms can pull 10% less weight than they can in one-arm pull, which turns out to be 72 kilos per arm. If we make quick calculations, it turns out he can pull 144 kilos, which equals to 64 kilos attached to him, which finally equals a pull-up with 80% of his body weight. Now, let's say the same guy has a bilateral deficit of 20%. This time, each one of his arms can pull up 64 kilos. This means 128 kilos, equal to 48 kilograms attached to his body weight. As you can see, this time the same guy able to do one arm pull-up has 1 rep max of 60% body weight in a classic 2 arms pull. If the deficit is modifiable by our training, like certain studies and maybe this experiment also suggest, or even if this phenomenon is strictly about technique optimization and just getting better in a specific pattern, I guess this might be an argument that one-arm training is an extremely powerful tool. And for some it might be an obvious conclusion deriving just from the principle of specificity. But I guess looking at the bulk of material and analysis we went through, I can quite comfortably say that there are considerable differences between people when it comes to relative weighted pull-up strength and its correlation with one-arm pull-ups. There is a certain threshold that seems to be required, which I would place somewhere at 60%. There is also the upper threshold that rarely gets passed by people not capable of one-arm pull-up. I would place it at around 90%. But if you're training for your one-arm pull-up and happen to be in the middle between these thresholds, which is very possible if you're watching this video, I would highly consider putting most emphasis on practicing the one-arm pull-up with unilateral exercises and focusing on finding the most efficient technique that aligns with your own standards. I guess the last thing to address is, are there some exercises that are better than others at addressing these points?
The line of pull in the one-arm chin is quite different from a bilateral chin-up. Whenever using a unilateral pulling pattern, the scapula moves through a greater range of motion. Second thing is, when your center of mass is suspended under one anchor point instead of two, the entire pulling sequence and plane of motion is different.
As I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, this project is not a tutorial. Because of this, so far I have not talked about methods of learning the skill, programming, or giving any technical tips, because there is already a lot of that out there. But I think there are a couple of important aspects that I utilize in my coaching practice and might also share here at the end. As I'm writing this down, my friend Geek Climber published a video regarding his one-arm pull-up journey. The point I really agree on is that many traditionally used exercises are not really replicating the movement pattern. If you think about it, one-arm pull-up is a very tricky exercise when it comes to reducing intensity. I found that whatever strategy you use, the technique of the exercise will get compromised in some way. If we look at the squat with a barbell, the form will differ based on weight you're using, because the weight distribution of the whole system is changing. But the changes are still not nearly as significant, and your working sets with 80 or 90% will look pretty similar to your 1 rep max. The one-arm pull-up is already much too high intensity for most people. And the problem is that whatever we try to do to reduce it, we change the mechanics of the exercise as well. This is why our job should be choosing the variations that will have the least negative impact on the specificity, while providing enough reduction of intensity. The 3 biggest factors we want to replicate in the exercise are instability, meaning we need to learn to fight the rotation without the help of the second arm, the direction of force and its point of application. Basically, if you drew the line representing your force generated by working arm, it should be vertical and horizontally as close as possible to the center of mass of your body. Now, there are obviously other factors that need to be replicated, like range of motion or speed, but these are much easier to control regardless of the variation we are doing. If you look at the exercise like archer pull-up, you can see that even though it's challenging, it doesn't align with any of the points I mentioned. The line of pull is diagonal, and your center of mass is far from the point of force application. On top of it, the second arm on the bar creates more rotational stability, which makes it more similar to the classic bilateral version. In this context, a better choice would be something like a forearm assisted pull-up, known as a climber's method, since you're assisting by pulling down directly under a working arm. If you want something a bit easier, a fun exercise to try is what I call hand-on-hand pull-up, which is very similar to the commando pull-up variation. On the other hand, harder but potentially better exercise will be this specific band-assisted version. The band will provide less stability and allow your body to rotate. Also, you will not have to hold your assisting arm up, like in the previous ones. Instead of band, you can obviously use a rope or some string. Now, at certain point in time, I did create a pulley system that allowed me for quite accurate assistance management. If you're able to do something similar, but attach it in a way it assists you exactly in line with the pulling arm, this might be even better way, but probably too complicated, and I'm not sure if worth the struggle. So the way you can train the specific pattern is also by doing unassisted eccentrics or partial reps. If you're ready for them, in my opinion, they're really worth introducing. But the reality is that for most people they are too difficult to bring more benefits than risks. And the majority of athletes who can do them will still need to include different exercises if you look at it from the programming perspective. When it comes to some accessory drills that can also help, what I really like are the one-arm scapula depressions with the cue of visualizing that you want to touch the pulling hand with the shoulder of the second arm. Don't just think about the scapula, but imagine that you want to initiate the pull-up. Another thing definitely worth trying is the rope climbing. And I'm not saying you have to climb to the roof in 5 seconds or climb with using one hand. But as a supplementary work, it can teach you the right mechanics of pulling in one line close to the body, while at the same time strengthening your grip. Now, I obviously don't disregard any variation completely, and I certainly don't say that people can't achieve one-arm pull-up by using some other variations. Just like they can learn one-arm pull-up with weighted pull-ups exclusively, they can use the variety of different methods and have success with them. But remember that just because something is working for someone is not an ultimate argument. What we want to find out are the principles that everyone can apply and have a high chance of success. The one-arm pull-up project took a ton of work in the last 12 months of doing it, and along with the joy and curiosity, there was a lot of frustration and sleepless overthinking nights. I always do my best to provide you with the most accurate information in the best possible form. However, sometimes both of these things can be pretty overwhelming. Balancing that with my coaching practice and tough year at university was quite a challenge. And this is also the part of why you had to wait for such a long time. That's why I'm very happy it finally came to the finish line, and as always I leave the discussion open. After giving my 2 cents, I'm very excited to hear your stories, points of view, or maybe your own experiments. For me, it's not about being attached to a certain training style or method. It's about seeking the truth. And if there is one thing this project has taught me, is that you can never be too certain of anything. That's why I encourage you to leave comments, tag me in the related videos and discussions on the internet. I really want to see what more can be said on this topic, what else can we learn. The list of references, survey-related links and any corrections that will appear from now on are in the description. This time though, you get a link directing you to the new secret place, which is my website. On the website you can also see the information regarding my online coaching service if you happen to be interested in that. You can send your inquiry and apply, or book an independent one-time phone consultation if you have a specific problem with your programming or training in general. There is one last thing that we can't forget about, which is the gymnastics rings contest. And don't worry, I did not forget. So I just finished scrolling through all the answers for the contest. I have to say I had a lot of fun, and so I ended up choosing about 10 to 15 that are in my eyes the best, most creative. And what we're gonna do now is call Philip and let him choose the final 3 answers that gonna win the contest and win the gymnastics rings.
So we have to pick 3 winners now of these funniest responses, right?
Exactly, yeah. We have to choose the 3 most creative answers or the funniest ones.
You want me to explain why I should win the rings? Well, bring it on. Okay.
You see the wordplay, right?
Yeah, I see it.
Play.
Of course. Most girls would want a wedding ring, too expensive. Most guys want the audio rings, too expensive. I just want the gymnastics rings. I think I should win the rings. This is why if I don't get the rings, I'm gonna be sad. If I'm sad, all of my family will be sad. And in a matter of days, everyone in the world will be sad. Gornation employees will be sad too, and the company would go bankrupt. So if the rings, Gornation and actually the entire world will be saved. If you want to save the world, contact me by email. Okay, cool.
This is like a threat, you know?
Yeah.
So
once Albert Einstein was walking in front of the school when he saw a little boy crying. Being touched, he approached the little boy and said, "Don't let anyone say you can't win Gornation rings 30 years ahead." This is still waiting to this day. Oh wow.
Like we can't verify if that's a true story. Like there's a high possibility he just made it up. Right, but it could be true.
Yeah, maybe you can ask him if you can send a selfie with Albert or something. My gymnastics ring straps don't have numbers, so every exercise I have to adjust my ring's height with a measuring tape while my friends laugh at me. Yeah. I'm sorry, I fully feel you. They call me construction worker. They ask me to bring a protractor to measure the planche front lever angles, and they even say that I measured the average, you know what size of all men. Anyways, please let me have new rings and put an end to the bullying. Yeah, this one is creative. This one seems nearly as real as the story with Albert.
But that's really sad that he has to deal with this sort of bullying.
Yeah.
I just feel bad for the guy, you know?
We've all been there. So, according to several studies, calisthenics results are 50% training, 30% nutrition, 10% if you use chalk, 5% supplements, and 5% the brand of your rings. I want that extra 5%. Okay.
What I like about this answer is that the guy, brought science into it.
Yeah.
The real scientific evidence.
Albert, construction worker, and the whole world turning sad. These are the 3 most creative and most funny in a way answers, I think.
So this is the moment I want to thank all of the people who gave their answers, as well as to every single participant of the survey itself. Also, big shout out to Phil and the whole Gornation for making the contest possible. I also want to express my gratitude to all individuals directly involved in the project or its promotion. Finally, I want to thank every single one of you watching for your patience. I wish you all the best in the new year and hopefully see you soon. Thank you so much for watching. This was Frings Movement TV. Talk to you next time.